It was the last Friday before winter break in a small Massachusetts town. The schoolyard was transformed into a white canvas as snow fell steadily. The bell rang, and kids rushed outside, bundled up in puffy jackets and wool hats. Except for one. 8-year-old Jamie noticed him right away. There by the bike rack stood a quiet, skinny boy with hollow eyes and mismatched clothes. His name was Chris. His coat was thin, his jeans had holes at the knees, and worse, he had no boots, just a pair of worn-out sneakers, soaked through with snow. Jamie hesitated. He barely knew Chris, who had transferred into their class only a month ago. Chris's parents were barely making ends meet, according to rumors, and his mother was working nights. Most kids just ignored him, but Jamie couldn't stop staring at Chris's shivering feet. Later that day, Jamie made a decision. He opened his locker, pulled out a spare pair of his favorite red boots, which were barely worn, and stuffed them into Chris's cubby without saying a word. The next Monday, Chris showed up wearing them. He never asked where they came from, but he looked a little taller that day, a touch warmer, a little less invisible. Years passed. Middle school, high school. They moved around in different groups. Jamie went off to college in Vermont. Chris faded into the background again. Until one day, 15 years later, Jamie was racing down a dark highway outside Boston, heading home for Thanksgiving. It was late, icy, and visibility was poor. A deer shot across the road. Jamie swerved. The car flipped over. When he came to, everything was a blur. Sirens, flashing lights, voices. He was trapped, blood on his forehead, pinned in by metal. Panic set in. Then came the voice. "You're gonna be okay, I've got you." Strong hands worked the jammed door. A flashlight beam cut through the wreckage. A paramedic pulled him out just before the car caught fire. At the hospital, Jamie kept asking who had saved him. A nurse finally answered, "That was Chris Daniels, one of our finest physicians, said he knew you." Jamie's chest tightened. He requested to meet him. A few hours later, Chris walked in, older, broad-shouldered, wearing an EMT uniform. Before he spoke, there was an extended silence. "You gave me those boots," Chris said quietly. "In the 3rd grade. You didn't even know me." Jamie blinked, stunned. "I didn't think you even remembered." "I wore those boots every day that winter," Chris said. "They kept me warm when everything else felt cold. You gave me a human-like feeling. That stuck with me." They sat in silence for a moment. Two men, once just boys in a snowy schoolyard, now forever tied by an act of kindness. Through the oxygen mask, Jamie smiled. "I think we're even." Chris gave a head shake. "You saved me long before I saved you." The story of the boots spread around town. It was shared on local news, then across the internet. Strangers donated to Chris's emergency unit. Jamie started a foundation to provide winter clothes for kids in need. Sometimes kindness doesn't look like much, just a pair of red boots slipped quietly into a cubby. But sometimes it comes full circle, in ways no one could ever imagine. And in a world that frequently feels cold, it is the smallest, selfless acts that bring warmth back. The snow from their childhood had long since vanished, but the warmth that came from that simple act stayed with both of the men. Jamie's recovery took weeks. Surgery, physical therapy, and sleepless nights were accompanied by doubts about fate rather than the accident. Why Chris? Why that moment? Why had the same person saved him from certain death? A boy who once gave away boots without expecting anything in return. Chris visited often. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. But every time he walked in, there was a quiet understanding between them. Something deeper than gratitude or coincidence. It was something sacred, woven into the fabric of time. Jamie learned more about Chris in those hospital visits than he had in all their years growing up. He learned that Chris had gone through hell in silence. His mother worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. Chris had experienced numerous instances of hunger. However, he also discovered that the red boots had been more than just a source of warmth. They were proof that someone had seen him when he felt invisible, a belief that the world, despite its cruelty, as a few instances of grace had been sparked by that insignificant act. He had chosen to be that moment for someone else as a means of service as a result. Chris had never lost his memory. Jamie couldn't either. As he healed, he returned to the memories of his younger self, wondering what made him give those boots in the first place. He couldn't remember a grand reason. It just felt right. Maybe that was the lesson. Kindness doesn't need a reason, it just needs to happen. Once out of the hospital, Jamie kept his promise. The foundation he started, the Red Boots Project, took off faster than he imagined. Donations poured in from people all over the country. Students, teachers, parents, even celebrities. Everyone had a story, a memory of being helped or helping someone when it mattered most. Winter clothes were sent to underfunded schools across the U.S. Children who once wore garbage bags for coats were now walking to school in warmth and color. Chris, meanwhile, became the face of quiet heroism. He didn't talk to people. He didn't want the spotlight. But he kept working, responding to calls, pulling people from wrecks, talking kids down from rooftops, holding the hands of strangers on their worst days. The world called him a hero. He just called it his job. One December, Jamie invited Chris to speak at a school where they were delivering coats and boots. At first, Chris declined. "I'm no good at speeches," he said, but Jamie insisted. So Chris stood before a group of fourth graders, fidgeting, clearing his throat. "When I was your age," he began slowly, "I didn't have much, not even boots for the snow. One kid noticed. He didn't laugh. He didn't ask questions. He quietly gave me what I needed. I never forgot that." He stopped and looked at a boy in the front row who looked like him. "I'm not here because I'm special. I'm here because someone else was kind. And that kindness made me want to do something good with my life. You all have that power. Don't wait for someone to tell you what to do. Just look around, see someone, help them. That's how we change the world." The room was quiet for a long beat, then filled with applause. Years later, long after the accident faded from memory and the news headlines moved on, two men met again, this time not as rescuer and rescued, but as lifelong friends. They sat on a porch somewhere outside the city, sipping coffee, watching the seasons change. "I still have those boots," Chris said one day, chuckling. "Naturally, they won't fit. But I keep them." Jamie looked at him, surprised. "Seriously?" "Yeah, in a box. They remind me where I came from." Jamie smiled. "They remind me who I want to be."